today to our HR Critical Skills webinar that is being facilitated by HR Recruit and Helen Bailey. My name's Jo Thompson. I'm a consultant for HR Recruit. I'm joined today by Helen, who will introduce herself shortly. This session will assist with sharpening your critical thinking abilities and enable you to leverage data to achieve outstanding results for both your people and your business. If you've got any burning questions or comments during the session, then please put them into the chat box facility and we will cover them as we go along. I'm now going to hand you over to Helen, who will introduce herself and start the event. Thank you.
Hey, hi everybody. So I'm Helen Bailey. I'm going to take you through some critical thinking skills today. Thank you so much for joining us. Something a little bit about me, because who doesn't want to know about that? If you scan that, you can scan that QR code and connect to me on LinkedIn. I often describe myself as being constantly curious. Actually, it just means I'm a bit nosy, but it is incredibly useful when we're thinking about critical thinking. I once took over a team. I've done a lot of interim work, and I once took over a team. And one of the things I kept saying to the team, so why do we do it like that? And they were like, Helen, you just need to, rein it in a little bit now, which is fine. Although I'm only 20, I have over 20 years experience in a variety of sectors. There's a bit grey hair. I know I'm older than 20. It's fine. And what I'm really interested in is leadership development, diversity, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later on. Mental health, employee engagement, and analytics. And I think there are kind of two sides to me. One is the kind of creative side, and the other one is I'm really interested in numbers. So I didn't put a picture of myself on that slide. I put a picture of a Lego unicorn. I know we've only just met, but has anybody got any thoughts about why I might have done that? What do you think that kind of represents about me? I'm going to give you a minute. Do you want to pop it in the chat for me? And don't worry, I don't take offense very easily. So, yeah. Unique. Thank you, Carol. I like to think I'm weird and unique. I like the unique. Oh, I'm loving this. It's making me feel really good about myself. Perhaps I'm mythical. Perhaps I am. Perhaps I'm AI generated. Fabulous. I like that. For any Strictly fans, I'm very much Craig Revel Hurwood. Fabulous. Different parts together. I like to have fun. I'm able to change shape. I wish. I am special. Oh, I'm loving those. Those are great. Actually, there is a reason. I work mainly on my own. Yeah, I do. I'm full of energy. I've got a big coffee in front of me. So the reason I put a unicorn there, do you know, I'm going to spend the whole webinar just on this, Jo, if that's okay, because this is great.
Yeah, that's fine.
I just do this. It's great. Unicorns think outside the box. Yeah. The reason I picked it, Lego characters always get into trouble. Right, I am going to talk about why I picked it now. Thank you, Chris. The reason I picked it is because Kevin M. Yates, who talks about measurement in learning, which is predominantly my space and where I spend a lot of time, talks about people who work in L&D who like numbers are a bit like unicorns. They're a bit unique and they're a bit different because actually, let's face it, nobody got into L&D and probably HR because they thought there was a spreadsheet involved. And we'll come back to my relationship with spreadsheets, I think, a bit later on. But I do like the idea that I'm always getting into trouble because, yes, I probably am. So what are we going to talk about today? So I really wanted to get into what is critical thinking and what stops us doing that. And I want to give you a little bit of a framework and we'll talk about some skills, some things to look out for. I think we are living in a world where there's a lot of data being thrown at us. That data isn't always as accurate as it might be. And then we'll talk about why is it useful to HR professionals. And then finally, and I'm not going to say any more about that, we'll get into it. So I wanted to start off just with a little bit of a Menti. And just for you to tell me what 3 words you would use to describe critical thinking. So you've got 2 things you can do. You can scan the little QR code, which won't be working because apparently my computer's not having a bit of a moment. What I'm trying to do is talk and put this in the chat at the same time, and I obviously can't do that. Or you can go on to www.menti.com 67423167. I'll just make sure I've put that to everybody. And then you can put your 3 words in. I'll just give you a minute, and Chris has started us off in the chat.
I don't think it's gone to everybody, Helen.
I've just popped it in again, Joe. So hopefully it will have gone in again now for everybody. So Chris has started us off with detailed. Yeah, I think the detail is really important. Problem analysis. In fact, you could take problem analysis as 2 separate ones, Chris. I don't know whether that's what you intended. Just give me a minute. Questioning, digestive. We're going for the chat, which is fine. Analytical, evaluation. Oh, I love a bit of evaluation. Yeah, that's a whole other thing I can get into. Considered, open-minded. It's about perspective. Creative. There's a lot of questioning, and I think whenever I talk about this topic, there is an element of kind of saying, so why do you think that? And I think perhaps we need to practice different ways of saying that. Logical reasoning. Oh, we'll come on back to that, Zoe. Having a helicopter view. Thanks, Bonnie. Synthesis of relevant information, exploring. Love those. Reflecting. So there's a lot of things actually going on here in terms of what critical analysis, what critical thinking skills might be. So let's have a look at some thoughts. There you go. As if by magic, it appears. That's my favorite thing. Analytical. Outside of the work that I do in these kind of spaces, I spend a lot of time marking assessments for ILM and CIPD, and I think my analytical mind really lends itself to that, because I've kind of got what does that mean? Curious, I describe myself as curious. Being your own critical friend. I think that's really important. One of the things we'll talk about here is actually, what does that, why am I thinking like that? What's my frame? I'm an L&D person. I naturally lend myself to things that involve L&D, but sometimes I need to think outside that box. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for doing that. And what I'm going to do, just to let you know, is I'm going to put the mentees into the slides and then give the slides to Joe. So Joe will be able to share those with you after. Okay. So if you wanted to look at a definition, this is not a bad one to start off with. And this is on the CIPD podcast. Again, just to let you know, pretty much everything I mention, I've referenced at the back of the slide. So you'll be able to just kind of click on it and it'll take you straight there. So critical thinking is the ability to think well, to think clearly, to take into account a number of diverse considerations and to reach conclusions which engage and take other people with you. And you might almost say critical thinking is about storytelling. Because actually, when we want to influence, when we want to persuade, because we do want to do all that in our roles, what we're really talking about here is we need to take people on a journey. Yeah, we need to say, this is why you should run this training course in Barbados. I don't know where in the Barbados is, but Barbados will settle for that today. And there are actually 3 elements to it. So one is really being able to critique the ideas, opinions, and arguments of others. I think we're going to have a couple of examples a little bit later of things that have actually happened to me. And we'll talk about how I responded in the moment, but really getting to the heart of it and then really creating arguments. So constructing arguments and opinions that are communicated to others, and then working out when other people are using critical thinking techniques. Because if you're using somebody else's thoughts and data, and then you are communicating that, is there a kind of a flaw? And one of the things, I think logic has come up somewhere in the chat, but one of the things we really need to think about is from a logic perspective, does that all make sense? Okay, so why are we talking about it? Well, one of the first reasons we're talking about it is because the World Economic Forum, in their top 10 skills of 2023, put analytical thinking straight at the top. Okay, anybody got any thoughts about why that might be? You pop those in the chat for me. I can have a sip of my strong coffee. Why do you think analytical thinking was at the top 10 skills of 2023 by the World Economic Forum? It's true, Bonnie. We have more information than we've ever had. Yeah. The misinformation, Claudia. Yeah. Skills gap. Yeah. Need of data. So much data out there. This honestly, yes. The complexity. Yeah. Relevant for all roles. There's too much information, Sharon. Yeah. And sometimes I think when we get into critical analysis, we kind of get into paralysis. Can't say it. Data paralysis. Paralysis. There you go. Got it. So we get into that data paralysis because there is so much that we should look at. Yeah. It's about growth. It's about getting the most objective solutions. Yeah, rethinking the world of work. I think that's a really good shout, actually, because I think we are moving into this space. And I'm going to talk a little bit about AI later. I need to tell the real information from the BS. I think, in a world where fake news, that is something that exists. And again, I'm going to talk about, we've had some elections recently. AI is confusing the hell out of everybody. I think what I feel about AI, Chris, and to everybody, is that everyone's talking about it. Nobody's really quite sure what we should be doing with it. The World Economic Forum, then, just to return to them, they talked about the rationale for putting it at the top because it was the least automated workplace task, and it counts for just 26% of task automation. And so with that in mind, they felt it was a skill that went right to the top, which is kind of an interesting thought. If we kind of bring that down into a kind of, HR professional world, then if we look at the CIPD, they're talking about evidence-based on their HR profession map. So in their purpose, they're talking about an evidence-based approach. So what does that really mean? So when you break down the standards, and I'm not going to read you the entire standard, so that's a sigh of relief probably for everyone involved. I'm certainly just going to high point just a few. If you look at some of the things that I've highlighted in the boxes in yellow, we've got how to assess the quality and relevance of evidence available, how data and analysis can be used. It's about emerging research and findings that have the potential to add value. There's loads more. I just wanted to highlight some of those. And there is a very strong relationship between evidence-based and critical thinking. And the relationship fundamentally is that we need to apply the critical thinking to the evidence that we're looking at. But that box at the top that I've just highlighted now talks about there are 4 types of evidence in decision making. So again, question from the chat. Does anyone know what the 4 types of evidence are before I show you? This is because you're so engaging with the chat. I'm just making use.
It's because you wanted a sip of your brew, Helen.
It is because I want a sip of my brew. I feel like I've got to be really high energy now because somebody talked about it at the beginning. So I feel like I've got to maintain that all the way through. Any thoughts, or shall I show you? Primary, secondary anecdotal? Oh, we've got some interesting models. I do like a metric though, Mira. Oh, I do like a few models. Do you know what? The CIPD haven't gone down this route, but I am enjoying this. I do enjoy a bit of quality and quantitative. Anecdotal might be one of them. Yeah, let's have a look. Okay, CIPD, when they talk about the 4 sources of evidence, they talk about these things. They talk about scientific literature. And what they're really meaning is research. And we might talk about, where has that research come from, for example. They talk about organizational data. You've already said that organizations are full of data. It's everywhere. And it is. We're measuring more things, I think, now than we've ever have done before. It's about expertise and judgment. Because where does expertise and judgment come from? Well, let's think about it. Expertise and judgment comes from all our experience. So, there is an element where you go, do you know what? Some of that is going to be relevant. And then they also talk about stakeholder viewpoints. So they talk about where are stakeholders going, what's their view on it, and their input. But I love the things that you popped in the chat. I just wanted to say that. So if we took critical thinking and applied that to each of these, here's some questions that we might ask. So when we look at scientific literature, I would say, is it from a reputable source? Where's it come from? So I don't want to pick on anybody or any group in particular, but if the extent of your research is always the first thing that you've Googled, I'm going to suggest that's going to be quite limited. Really think about, where was it published? Who published it? Why did they publish it? Where did they come from? Because that will really shade the perspective. And that's really what we are thinking about with critical thinking skills, that the perspective is shaded. Organizational data, is it representative? One of the examples I'm going to show you a bit later, it was one person. If 4,000 people work in an organization, but 10 people are saying it, is it representative of the whole organization? It has been recorded, Andy, just to let you know. Expertise and judgment, is there a bias in play? So, in my world of diversity, inclusion, and equality, I'm often talking about unconscious bias. And I'm quite happy to share, the very first time that when I first started getting into training, I always wrote managers as men, for example, until somebody pointed it out to me. So is there a bias? Would I always have a bias for an L&D solution? Because that's my thing. And then stakeholders, and again, it's what's the rationale for their viewpoint? Where's it coming from? So really what we're asking here, or what we're talking about, is getting under the skin of things, and really understanding where's that come from. But what stops us? What gets in the way? And I've just popped another Menti here because I'm really interested from you to hear what stops us thinking critically. 157 of you are here. What stops us thinking critically? So again, you should be able to scan this one because my computer has made its mind up. It wants to play. We'll just pop the Monty code in here. Emotions. Louder voices. There you go. I've just popped it in the chat as well. Ego, stress. I was reading an article this morning, which was talking about HR professionals are busier than ever. Busier than ever. We've had all this legislation that's just come out from the Labour government. That of course is making a difference. That means there's a lot of stuff going on there. We have a fixed mindset, got limited headspace. Yeah, fear of being judged. It's actually, I do wonder if sometimes it's a little bit controversial to say, do you know what? Where's that coming from? What's the evidence behind that? Yeah. Conditioning, culture of the organization. I'm loving those. Fear of getting it wrong. Yeah. I think when I thought about this, Menti, I do like a little smiley face as well. Lovely. Thank you very much. Wow, this is like the best day of my life. Yeah. Overwhelmed, time, fear. Yeah. Bias, imposter syndrome, feeling psychologically safe to do it, Bonnie. Yes. I think, that fourth level of psychological safety in Amy Edmondson's work, where she talks about safe to challenge, I think that's really interesting. Do people, and I often use that in employee engagement surveys, actually. Do you feel safe to challenge? And people will often say they feel safe to challenge. I'm not quite sure whether they do. The reality of that is kind of a different thing. Okay. Yeah, I know things about a previous case. Yeah, there's a lot going on. I think that's ultimately it. The last L&D survey, so if I talk very specifically about L&D, the last L&D survey conducted by the CIPD really put analytical thinking right down, probably in the lowest quarter of things that L&D were focused on. But actually, if you do work on it, you're probably doing the right thing. So it's about priorities. Yeah, low self-esteem, I don't feel as though I can say. And I wonder if there is, and confidence comes up in here as well, Brian. And I do wonder if confidence, you need to be confident to be able to say, can are you sure that's right? Or, yeah, can I just ask you about that? So here's some things that I kind of thought of. So confirmation bias. So we have a view. We've talked about bias quite a lot already. We've talked about, I have a view. I kind of know where I think this should be going. And that's what we look for. Yeah. Heuristics, which is those mental shortcuts. You've just talked about time. It's easier. I can do a mental shortcut. I know where this is going. I'm going to make an educated guess. And we talked about, those 4 sources, and we talked about using our kind of expertise. But sometimes that's not always right. The framing, what is our position on this? Yeah. What's my focus? What am I really interested in? If you are really interested in a particular topic or a particular area, you might be tempted to go down that way. And then just some common fallacies. And what I meant by that was, those things that people say, well, everybody thinks that, which is one of my least favorite expressions. Does everybody think that? And how do you know that? And that gets tossed about quite a lot. We should go and do a well-being program, for example, because everybody's off with stress. Is everybody off with stress? Really? And what's causing that? And what we start to get into is the nuances of information, and that's what's really important here. Something I've found, and I just think this is a really interesting quote to kind of think about in terms of the data, because we've talked about there's so much of it now. It's not about adding more to your plate. So just because you're looking at data, it doesn't mean we are adding more and extra things into the day job, because we already know that the day job's quite busy. Yeah. But it's about making sure you're doing the right things on your plate. Yeah. And if I take learning, because I'm going to, aren't I? If I take learning specifically, I always say I can do all the learning in the world, but if it wasn't what was needed in the first place, then I've probably wasted your time. And as somebody who works freelance and goes into clients and lots of different businesses, I don't want to be wasting people's time. I mean, I guess I'm still getting paid, but I like to engage in work that's meaningful. So this is about priorities. This is about helping us work on the things that will make a real difference to the business. Okay, shall we have a look at some stuff then that will help us get there? So I really wanted to talk about a little bit of a framework, a little bit of something to get you started, and then to think about some skills. And I think we've started to touch on some of this already. So this comes from the University of Edinburgh. I've linked this in the back of the slides for you, and just some things about to get you started. So the first thing really is about identify a range of positions. So when you go and do some research, try and look for the opposite view. If you've done the 6 thinking hats with Edward de Bono, there is a hat which gets you to think about the opposite. And that's almost what you're doing here. Try and find different views on the topic. The judging, I'm not sure whether I like the word judge, but we'll go with it. It's really about thinking about the credibility of the sources. And we've touched on that already. Is there bias? Is there prejudice? Is there any self-interest that we're doing here? Really evaluate the opposing arguments. How does that kind of stack up? Bring it together. And then really what you're doing then is drawing some conclusions. And when the CIPD particularly talk about evidence-based, what they're trying to get you to do, and get us all to do, is think about when you are presenting a business case, it's being able to say, we should do this because X, Y, Z, and you have the data and you have the references. And actually, one of the best ways to kind of bring that together is triangulation, which is one of my favorite words. Triangulation actually just means using 3 sets of data. And if those 3 sets of data are telling you the same thing, it's probably right. And then it's about presenting that information. Okay, so if we're going to do all of that, what skills do we need? So that's a question back for the chat. I can drink my strong coffee. Off we go. Credible research data. Yeah, we need to know where to look. Yeah, we need to get good with the research. Yeah. Quite often when I'm doing anything like this, the first thing I do is actually just start with the whole, I just kind of post a sort of page of links and then I kind of start to differentiate between the ones that I'm going to view. You need to be able to tell the story, Gail. Yeah, that's a good one. Being curious, being open-minded, time, bit of project management. Yeah. Networking. Oh, Carol, I love that. One of the things I'm going to talk about in a little bit is diversifying your thoughts. Yeah. What have I already assumed? Yeah. I see you didn't need me. I'm going to keep talking anyway, but there's some great things in the chat. Have the data to back up the narrative. Bit of cost analysis, that doesn't go amiss either. I think that's the other thing, isn't it? We can't, I see a lot of action plans in my life. I see a lot of implementation plans. And then sometimes I look at that costing and I go, I'm not sure that that is going to be as free as you think it is. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Deborah. It's lovely to meet you as well. So let's have a look at some skills that I kind of put up. And I think I went a bit broader than you did, but we'll work on it together. So the first one is to start digging. Not literally in your garden or anywhere else that you feel that you want to dig. This is about, okay, what's underlying this data? One of the things I've put in the links for you is a link to a post by somebody called Andrew Jacobs, who runs a podcast called Women Talking About Learning. And he's talking about some data that was presented to say that everybody wants back in classroom learning effectively. But actually, the data comes from 2018, and some of the quotes actually come from the pandemic. So the question there is that data still relevant now? Yeah. And is there anything that kind of disproves that in the moment? So you kind of have to go through that process. Reason through logic. And I think somebody mentioned this in the chat, if I remember rightly. But that reason through logic is really about does the logic stack up here? Does the data tell that story? Is it all pointing to that, or is something pointing somewhere else? And if it's pointing somewhere else, why is that? Ask great questions. I love great questions. And what I'm really talking about here is of other people. Tell me where you're coming from on that. What have you been looking at that's drawn you to that conclusion? This is not meant to be challenging. This is about really understanding people's perspectives. I'm going to go a weird way around. Diversify thoughts. So I think that's come up somewhere because I mentioned it just a minute ago. There is a really good school of thought that if you get people together who've always worked in the same organisation, you'll always get what you've always got. So if you want to be exposed and want to have better critical thinking skills, then you need to diversify. I'm going to use an example that I've used a couple of times before. Matthew Syed, in his book Rebel Ideas, talked about bringing a group of people together to make the England football team better. The men's football team, I need to say that. I don't know whether Joe has time for another webinar where we can talk about that and debate that in more detail. Probably not. But the idea was they weren't all football people. There were so Matthew Syed himself is a table tennis player. There was boxing, cycling, and what it did was brought another perspective and started to ask, why do you always do that in football? Yeah, as a Man United fan, I seem to think that maybe that would have been a good idea just recently. Moving on. Question assumptions. Businesses make assumptions all the time. Our market is this. Our market is this. They've got our customers have loads of disposable income. They're able to do this, this, and this. Are they? And there's some good examples of organizations who've kind of assumed things and then the market has changed. M&S, for example, always presumed they had a particular market, Marks and Spencer's. So really understand that and understand your position, your frame. What are the things? And there's kind of a couple of bits of work you do here. I think one is about what is that drives you. What is the things that interest you? What is it, the things that you're really passionate about? Because that will always frame your perspective. Yeah. So you might be guessing by now, one of my frames is critical thinking and analysis. So if you have a conversation with me, at some point, I'm always going to say to you, how do you know that? And it can be a bit annoying. I'm just putting it out there so you know. But really understand the position. And then this point at the bottom actually comes from Adam Grant. He says, keep an open mind. And again, one of you mentioned that in the chat earlier. Excuse me. So keep an open mind. It might not be the answer you were expecting, but be open to it. So some things to kind of keep your eye out for and some things where it's gone a little bit awry. So what I've done is essentially just to kick us off with this is kind of just picked out a few headlines. Um, my favorite one, if you're supposed to have a favorite one out of this, is the error that could subvert George Osborne's austerity program. One of the things you can go and have a look at is Hannah Fry, who's a mathematician, has done a very short TikTok video. There is a link to the actual article in the back of the slides, and it talks about that actually the UK went into austerity because somebody presented a paper at a conference with misleading information on, and they didn't know it was misleading because there was an error in the spreadsheet. So there is a kind of, when I'm starting to talk about digging deeper there, then actually, think about the mechanisms that you are using to do that. And that's probably something we should probably consider with AI as well. We've got the one about Excel may have caused the loss of 16,000 test results. There's the ones about the election campaigns in 2019, the TikTok users. This is from the last UK election. And what had happened on TikTok was there was a manipulation of the kind of data and the images. And my favorite example of this that I found was Rishi Sunak saying, I'm trying to remember the expression now that it was, but it was not something that Rishi Sunak was said. I'd be properly upset if I don't win this election. And I think it was a bit stronger than that. But if we don't look kind of beyond that and we take that as read, then we kind of believe that. This more than 80% of dentists recommend Colgate. So this sounds quite good, doesn't it? 80% of dentists recommend Colgate, and other toothpaste providers are available, obviously. But actually, that's a good shout. I like that, more or less. Yeah. Do you know what? That's a really good example of something that is learning in the chat that isn't necessarily learning, if you know what I mean. So it's not like kind of you coming to a webinar or stuff. Yeah. I do like the Office for National Statistics, Ollie. Big fan of that as well. But this 80% of dentists who recommend Colgate, they were asked to recommend a range of toothpaste and brands, and Colgate came up more than any other. It wasn't a case that 80% of dentists recommended Colgate. 80% of dentists recommended Colgate alongside a number of other things. Yes, Stella, adverts in mass media will test one's critical thinking. A few weeks ago, I went to see John Ronson. He's got a book. It's called The Psychopath Test. It is relevant, this, I promise you. One of his stats actually is that 4% of CEOs are psychopaths. I'll just leave that with you. But what was interesting about that was he lives in America, and he was talking about it looks like Trump was going to win the next election. And it kind of just made me think, because I didn't feel that was the image I was getting. And what about AI then? Well, what are your thoughts on AI then in terms of bias and using it for critical thinking? I'd be really interested to see some of those in the chat. Because I think, yeah, still, I noticed, Sharon, actually, that I was using ChatGPT the other day to kind of help me come up with some case studies, because that's really not my gig. And one of the things I noticed was, please fact check has now suddenly appeared on the bottom of AI. Yeah. Can provide a view, but don't rely on it. Yeah. Bias, often use older information, so it can be out of date. There's lots of questions and I think queries. Yeah. It sometimes manufactures. Yeah. There's a lot going on. Oh, that's interesting. Thank you. I think it's Rosilla. Perplexity is a better platform. Okay, that's a good shout. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think a lot of people are starting to use it to help you understand something rather than articulate a message or give you. I think as Andy's using there, to give you a format or a structure. Yes, Holly, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of confidential data into ChatGPT, and I would absolutely echo that. Yeah, really think about what you put in there. And I think the framing is also important. So whenever I talk to Chat GPT, I will give it the sort of framework in which I'm working with. I'm a HR professional. I'm delivering a webinar on critical thinking skills, yeah, etc. And some things just to kind of, yeah, you could be plagiarizing, absolutely. Some things just to get you to think about, really, and some of the challenges I think when using AI, it's that passive consumption. I do think we've kind of got into a place where we get it from AI and sometimes it's taken as it's the truth or it's factual and we're absolutely dependent on it. And one of the things it kind of talks about when we talk about AI is that we are losing those cognitive skills to analyze. One of the things I really wanted to find was the kind of trajectory of critical skills thinking, but it's really quite hard to find. But I would suggest that things like AI, the absolute ton of information that is out there has kind of changed it. Yeah. Yeah, it has been trained by white males. It's a bit like the smartwatches and why they didn't track periods in the beginning because they were all made by men. Um, so passive consumption. So we're kind of not really engaging in that. We're just kind of taking it and we're going, yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it's quick and easy, isn't it? Because we already know how busy we are. Oh gosh, Zoe, I hope you're okay. We're having a fire alarm. Okay. It also can reinforce bias. So interestingly enough, if you ask ChatGPT to generate certain images, it'll leave out things like disability or certain ethnic cultural heritage until you actually ask it specifically for it. So that's not going to change, I don't think, in the near future. So I think it's really thinking about, do I have to ask AI better questions as well? So I've talked about framing what you ask AI, but I think also in terms if you're looking for something specific, and you might not get, and as Fidesz is saying in the chat, if it's mostly by American white males, you are getting a perspective. And then the last one is quite an interesting point, which is about ethical abdication. Is it? Yeah, it is almost an extension of Google. Is it? And actually, what's happening is I've got it from AI. I don't have to make that decision making, and that's my justification. Um, I'm not sure many people are doing that, and I think it's more a case of people are using it to get started. I think we're very curious about AI. I think it can do some really great things, but I do think, as you've said in the chat, we do need to be a little bit careful about what we do with that work. Just an interesting thing if you ever want to put yourself into AI and just ask it what it thinks about you. It will then pull a sort of collection of things about yourself. I'm just saying you might want to do that. You might not. So why are we talking about it? For HR professionals, what are HR professionals going to do with critical thinking? And I really want you to think here about specific scenarios. So, what way are you going to be using this in your workplace? I'll give you a minute. Yeah, there is an expectation for HRBPs to be strategic. Absolutely, Gail. I feel like I know your name, Gail. I'm gonna but I don't get hung up on that. Stakeholder management and business partnering, ask him, sir. Yeah, complexity. HR has really changed, hasn't it? If you think about it, HR used to be, and personnel, if we want to go all the way back, was really about that admin kind of role. And now we're talking more about we're talking more about that kind of, strategic. We talk about business partnering. We talk about the Ulrich model, don't we? Yeah. There are lots of reports and white papers that make claims about what is best practice. But yeah, who commissioned them? Who financed them? Yeah, we need to advocate for company culture. Yeah. The report for an invest, that's a great example, Mira. When we're talking about investigate, when you do an investigation and a discipline and a grievance, you really are just trying to get to the facts. And when you're trying to get to the facts, sometimes there's an element of critical thinking involved in that. Um, you know, you need to remain fluid and current. That need to remain fluid and current. Yeah. they're being constantly curious. Loads of great examples here. And I think, if you think about the work of HR and all the things that kind of sit within that, there's loads of things, isn't there, that you'd be doing, and just some the adding value, the adding value question is that comes up again and again, isn't it? How do we add value within our roles? How do we demonstrate that we are valuable to the business? Yeah, as an L&D professional, Joanne, I really feel that. So some things, that I just kind of pull together, employee engagement survey results, retention data, absence level. But what I really wanted to do is have a look at a couple of things that people have said to me and to get your thoughts on what you think. Yeah, having productive conversations requires critical thinking, especially the difficult ones. I have a view on difficult conversations, Stella, and I think I would really like us to have better difficult conversations at work. I don't think we always get there. I think what happens quite a lot is that we kind of get into a kind of they said, she said, whatever kind of conversation. And I think if you're going to have really good conversations at work, you're going to have to do some critical thinking as you're going along. And that third element I talked about right at the beginning of this webinar, where we talk about, understanding where other people are coming from. We really need to do that. Okay, let me show you a couple of things that have been said to me. And what I really want you to do in the chat here for me is kind of think about those what sort of critical analysis, what kind of critical thinking would you apply to this? So the first one is, I don't know whether I'm necessarily quite proud of this, but we'll go with it. It's something that was written on a staff engagement survey. I would rather die than work here. This is true. Somebody popped this into their staff engagement survey. So what kind of critical rigor, critical analysis, what kind of questions would you be asking about this? Tell me more about your comment. What made you feel like this? Why'd you stay? Why are you still here? Yeah. Yeah. What can we improve? There's a lot of deep dive in here. Tell me a bit more about it. Are you okay? Yeah, absolutely. That's quite a strong emotional response. You're still not hearing, yeah. Why are you still work? What led you to feeling this way? I love that. There's some real kind of understanding what is going on for that person. Okay, so let me tell you the story of what actually happens in this scenario. So I had to present these results to the manager of this department, and I presented them to him, and he kind of said, "Oh my gosh, that's terrible." Rightly so. It's very strong, as we've noted, and you've kind of got under the skin of that. And I said, "How many people work in your department?" 25. Okay, so it's one person out of 25. So we're kind of looking at the perspective of that. We're also then talking about if you do an employee engagement survey, sometimes it's just how people feel on that day. And you could do that again, and it might be different. This doesn't take away the seriousness of what the person said or thought, but it's digging into those details. You're talking about one person out of 25. You're talking about a day, a snapshot. And actually, what we did do was did kind of a mini sort of check-in about a month later, just to see what those results were. So you're kind of digging into the detail. I love the questions that you asked though, to get into that. So I have another one. This is one I get asked a lot because I work in L&D. Helen, we need a time management course. What other questions do you think I should be asking here? Kelly, straight in there. That's my first question. What makes you think that? Yeah. What are you expecting? What's the goal? Why, Helen? I ask that question a lot. generally, not just in life. What are you trying to change? What's the aim? What problems are you trying to solve? What skills are you aiming to develop? I picked this one very specifically. I could have picked team building as well because I get asked for that a lot. And I think I could walk into any organization tomorrow and run a time management course. Um, you know, but generally people say I haven't got enough time. You talked about not having enough time, haven't you? But usually it's not the issue at the time that's the thing. It's usually something else. There's a process. Yeah. I love the fact that you decided to go for things like, okay, what do you want to see differently here? What are the skills here? What are all the things that are making a difference now? What are you doing now that isn't working? Great questions. I love those. So that's really what we're talking about here. It's really easy to take things at face value. It's really easy to go, okay, then, as a freelance consultant, I'm going, yeah, okay, then, and I'll charge you whatever for that. But actually, if you want to do meaningful stuff and if you want to do stuff that really makes a difference, those questions that you've identified in the chat, they're the way to go. Yeah. Is it about one person? Is it a whole team, Andy? Very rarely is it about a whole team, in my experience. Yeah. Okay, so that kind of brings us to the end. I was being conscious of time. And just a couple of things before I hand back to Joe, just to talk about. So further resources, obviously, when you get the slides, if you see this on the recording, these are all the things that I've kind of suggested that you go away and look at. And because I'm such a nice person, I even put the links in, so you'll be able to just click on them and it'll take you straight there. Thank you. You're very welcome. If you're really interested in the Microsoft thing, that's an article from The Guardian. And there's kind of you're welcome, Carol. And also there's a really interesting article about, does it really matter what we call things? Which Rob Briner, who's very big in this space, kind of talks about that application of evidence-based practice, because it does matter. And then just a couple, and finally, this is just one thing. I am fantabulous. Do you know I love the word fantabulous? I use that quite a lot. That's one of my favorite words, Gillet. Oh, I'm overcome. Right, just this one thing I wanted to talk about whilst I was here, if this is your thing. So one of the things that's an exciting project I'm working on at the moment is a level 4 award in managing equality and diversity in an organisation. It kind of combines two things that I really love, equality and diversity, and then also analysing what you've got in your organisation and figuring out whether it works. So it's something I'm working on with a company called Inspiring Cultures Limited. I'm going to leave the details there. And just if you'd like to know more, you can contact me or you can talk to inquiries at Inspiring Cultures Limited. And just before I hand back to Joe, just to say thank you so much. I think these sessions for me work best when people engage in the chat, and you absolutely did so. So I really thank you. And I believe we have a question as well, Joe. I can see that at the top of my screen. Shall I have a look?
Yeah, just go for it.
I really enjoyed meeting all of you too. Are there instances where common thinking is required in place of critical thinking? Are you thinking of common sense? I just wonder. I think sometimes there's that saying, isn't there, that if you work in a zoo, you'll always see zebras, for example. So you kind of link yourself into that moment. And I think sometimes we do need to think a bit of a common sense and not always think for that sort of super high answer to a problem. So I think sometimes it's not always about critical thinking. I think sometimes a bit of common sense needs applying. And some of that is about us being busy, and some of that is being reflectful. Yeah. Oh, Chris, your computer crashed halfway through. But yeah, how do we find the sense? Yeah, I would agree with you, Fidesz. It's, common sense is actually quite uncommon. We do tend to go for like the big sort of solutions when actually, if it's time management, it could be, let's stop using that process that's really a nightmare to use and is taking people ages to kind of get into. It's not always a thing. Okay.
Thanks,
Joe.
that was really interesting and really informative. So thanks very much. As I've put a couple of comments on the chat, we will send out some correspondence to everyone that signed up for the event, and I put a post on LinkedIn So if you'd like a copy of the follow-up information or recording, then please put a comment against the LinkedIn post. Our next event is on the 3rd of December and is called Unlocking Empowerment, Making and Taking It. Also, our sister company, FD Recruit, is also running an event next Wednesday, the 27th of November, and it's called Developing Leaders. A link to sign up for both events will be included in the email. If anyone's recruiting, we've also got accountancy recruit, FD recruit, and exec recruit in the group. Otherwise, I'd just like to say to Helen for your time and effort in putting the event together, and to everybody for signing in and tuning in. I'm sure that you found it really useful. Thank you.